Listen, don't let anyone, thank you. I know, I get 2 applauses. It better be twice as good for our speaker, I promise, I should say. Just as a reminder for those in person as well as online, we do have a Q&A function or a chat function that you're more than welcome to utilize online. And for those of you in person, please, if you have any questions, write them down, keep them in mind. We'll do our Q&A after our speaker. But with that, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our speaker for today. Mark Ireland is a senior compliance analyst for Aptiv Environmental, one of the nation's largest residential pest control companies. Mark is currently over the company's central region, where he conducts health and safety licensing and compliance audits, both on company facilities and technicians. One of his favorite things is learning about the backgrounds and experiences of the people and places that he audits. Mark and his wife, Laura, reside in Provo, Utah. In his spare time, he loves traveling with Laura, cooking new recipes, and doing genealogy work. And with that, please welcome Mark Ireland.
Thanks so much. Thank you. It's good to be with you guys today. So I'm flattered that I can, it's June 1st. It's National Safety Month. So I kind of feel like I'm leading the charge just a little bit. It's kind of fun, right? So anyways, but yeah, I appreciate that introduction. So I actually, just a little bit more about myself. So I went to grad school in 2014 at BYU. And then I went out to Washington, D.C., and I actually worked for an accounting firm, believe it or not. And I did compliance work over there. So where's accounting, health and safety, how are those related? So I was home about 5 years into my compliance work at Deloitte. My brother said, you ought to come interview with our company. We do compliance, but it's more in pest control and health and safety. Now that kind of sounds fun. And so I interviewed, they hired me. So I've been in the health and safety compliance licensing field for about 2 years now. I definitely consider myself a budding professional in this field. And so, yeah, just happy to be here with you guys today and answer any questions that I can. So you'll realize that this is a picture of Pumbaa. This is Pumbaa after Lion King. So he lost a little bit of weight, yeah. But Pumbaa here I think he represents a lot of how we feel after we've been out in the sun for a long, long time. It's just kind of like the sun's very draining. It can be very tiring. And so we all have our Pumbaa moments in the sun. So what can we do to avoid Pumbaa's condition here? So anyways, okay, that's me. I look a little bit different with my hair that way, don't I? So anyways, I don't know. The jury's still out. So anyway, whatever. So, okay. Oh, flip it. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, great. So what you do when you're a budding professional is you borrow from the expertise and the knowledge of other people, right? And so in my research on what I could share, I'm a member of the ASSP. And so I have my membership with them. And so I can go on and access peer-reviewed articles. And so I came across this article called Fire and Ice, Protecting Workers in Extreme Temperatures by Donald J. Garvey. And he's a very qualified individual in this space. I use the OSHA website, of course, and then yourselves. We all have different experiences with heat safety and awareness. And so, during our conversation today, it'd be great to open it up to, a little bit of discussion on what your thoughts are on heat and safety. Moving on. So the why. Why are we worried about heat and safety awareness? Why does it matter? Right? Well, the thing is, about 93 million miles away from the Earth, there's this big ball of gas. It's just burning and spewing off all this heat. And that's what we call it the sun, and we benefit from the sun. But the sun also can have some negative side effects. When you have that much heat, you have to know how to deal with it. So the why is this affects the lives of millions of people every year. We have millions and millions of people who are out in the field in the sun, and their lives are affected by it. And so the why is we want to try and help people live safe, productive lives so they get home to their families in the evening. So from 2011 to 2019, the BLS reported 344 worker-related deaths, due to environmental heat exposure. Workplace safety experts believe the actual number of heat-related fatalities may be underreported or misreported as another cause, such as heart attacks. And I would believe that. Sometimes when they issue a cause of death, they may not do a root cause analysis on it, but more the immediate cause of death, which might have been a heart attack. But in fact, there probably are more than 344 worker-related deaths due to heat exposure. So, but first I want to ask you guys a question. From an industry perspective, which industry do you think has the highest responsibility for, like, let me read this verbatim. Which industry is responsible for the highest rates of heat-related deaths? And then which industry is responsible for the second highest rates of heat-related deaths? What would you guys think? What's the industry, the number one killer of people due to heat-related illnesses? Okay. Pest control. Yes. I love you, man. You're great. Yes. Pest control. Yes. Of course. So.
These answers.
It's rigged. Let me tell you what. No, so the answer, so construction is very close. Actually, the answer is, oh, come on, agriculture. So agriculture is the number, actually it's almost twice as much in agriculture as it is in construction. So it's very high. And I mean, if we think about it, I mean, when you're in agriculture, I mean, you're out in these long sprawling fields doing work. You're not close to buildings, right? Where shade might be provided. And so agriculture is actually the number one killer of workers for heat-related illnesses. So, and then I got this. Oh, there we go. And then a close second is, in fact, construction. So construction is the number two killer of workers due to heat-related illnesses. Okay. So, but there are others. So we have agriculture, we have construction, but the other ones we want to look out for, and they're diverse and they're varied. So you have agriculture, of course, construction, especially outdoor work, landscaping. Interestingly enough, mail and package delivery. So your mailmen, they're out in the sun a lot. Oil and gas well operations, bakeries, kitchens, and laundries. That's interesting. Why would you think bakeries, kitchens, and laundries would? Yeah.
Confined spaces.
Confined spaces, very heat.
Ovens.
Yeah. A lot of moving. When people are working, they're moving kind of quick, they're moving around, getting their heart rate up a little bit, right? So fire service, obviously, and others. So anything that this isn't just for, jobs outside. It can also be for jobs inside where there's a lot of internal heat. I had a father who he was actually my age when he went to work for Geneva Steel back in the late 80s. And he worked in the hottest of hot environments. And he said he had to, they had their whole jumpsuit on, and it was 120 degrees in there. And he had to constantly take sips of water just to not fall in the lava stuff. Anyway, so yeah. So anyway, so there's lots of different types of industries where heat-related illnesses can occur. All right. So I want to watch this is about a 9 or 10 minute clip about a gentleman named Tim, who we'll watch this.
Tim was a hard worker. He loved his family. He loved the Buffalo Bills. He loved country music. He was an artist. He could draw paintings at a young age. He did them for businesses around the area. He did them for families, for murals. He did over to Leroy High School. To this day, we can still go over to that field house and look at the night that's there. And it makes us proud that we can say he was a part of that. Tim's job was a laborer on a construction company locally, and he did take some flag training course prior to starting. But on when he went over there for his first day, he basically was putting guardrails up and sorting bolts in doing that. That was Monday. He worked Monday, came home. He was sunburned, looked a little tired. He had his dinner. He laid on his bed. That's the last time his mother saw him. I got up the next morning because it was going to be very hot and I wanted to tar my back roof. And I got up at 5, and at 5:30 I went outside, and when I got up through the kitchen I saw a bowl of cereal. He was sitting on the steps putting his work shoes on, and I said, what are you doing? It's 5:30. He goes, I got to be in today at 6. I got to be in earlier. And I said, okay, here's what you got to do. Just from what I knew yesterday, you need to eat your lunch today. You need to drink your water. And he said, okay, I got to get going. I said, okay, have a good day. That's the last time I saw him. Never saw him again until we identified him in the back of an ambulance Tuesday evening. I got that terrible call from the sheriff's department. You're not prepared. And I never want a family ever to get a phone call that says, come and identify your son because he died of heat illness. And it was just a situation where he goes into work on Tuesday, not feeling 100% probably. Starts working again in excessive heat. You never would think it. I just thought this, boy, I'm so proud of you. Go to work. You're going to do well. But you never think he's not going to come home. And the thing that I want to really focus on or make a point of is it's the employer's responsibility to make sure you provide a safe workplace. That's number one. And if you provide a safe workplace and you take the time to look out for your employee, then this should never happen. He just wanted to do a good job. And he did. And he paid a price for it. And it's preventable. And it should never, never, never happen again.
So several days after the incident, I picked up the phone and called Jim Barber, I was given his name as the next of kin, and introduced myself and explained what OSHA's role would be in the investigation. And from that initial conversation, Jim and I seemed to develop a rapport right from the very beginning. One element of this particular case is that we're in Western New York, and people don't look at Western New York and think heat illness, but it's an important factor to consider. People aren't used to working in 90+ degree weather with high humidity. One of the other elements of this particular case that I think is important to note is Tim was a healthy 35-year-old male. People don't, take into account that heat illness is something that can infect anyone, not just someone who is might be compromised medically or have some other risk factors. What employers and employees need to do is understand that heat illness is a real hazard in the workplace.
Employers can prevent heat illness in the workplace with several straightforward actions. First, develop a heat illness prevention plan that outlines procedures, supplies, and equipment necessary to protect workers from heat exposure. Provide training to managers and workers on the signs and symptoms of heat illness. Nearly 3 out of 4 heat-related fatalities happen during the first week of work. Employers need to make sure that new and returning workers acclimatize or build tolerance to heat. It's important that workers drink water, take rest breaks in the shade or a cool area, and wear a hat and light-colored, loose-fitting, breathable clothing to prevent heat illness. Monitoring workers for signs of heat illness is important. Do verbal checks frequently with workers wearing face coverings or personal protective equipment, such as respirators. And finally, encourage workers to check on each other too. By taking these actions, employers can keep their workers safe and, importantly, prevent fatalities from heat illness, like what happened to Tim Barber.
We never thought we would be sitting here today talking about this tragedy, but it can happen. And I think he's looking down at us going, thanks, Dad. Thanks, Mom. We appreciate what you're doing for me. And if we can make a difference that no mom and dad ever has to go through this, then we've accomplished something. And if we can use Tim's name that we're very proud of, that would be even better. We also want to protect other families and workers. And we want business to be aware that this should never happen. But overall, he was just a loving son that we miss dearly. And, we're just deeply saddened that he's not here to enjoy some of those family events. And his sisters and brothers have had a hard time going through this. It's just not the same. And it's tough when you go to the cemetery, and we see him every week. He's got his Bills flag. He's got handprints of all the grandkids, his nieces and nephews. Beautiful flowers that Kathy does. And you look there and go, you're here. We just can't see you. And you're in our hearts and minds, and we love you dearly.
Thank you so much. So that's a very moving story about Tim Barber and that heat illness. The most tragic thing about heat illness is that it's preventable, right? It's not, it's completely preventable. And it really, it's a very moving story about that heat illnesses really affect people, and if we're not careful, they can take our lives. So let's talk a little bit about the different types of heat-related illnesses that there are out there. All right, so we have some that are more minor, and then of course they escalate up to what's called a heat stroke, which is the most advanced stage of a heat illness. It's when your temperature in your brain is above 104 degrees. Well, the temperature in your body is above 104 degrees, and you start not being able to function. Anyways, so we have rhabdomyolysis, muscle breakdown. That's a big word. I had to learn about that a little bit. Basically, what rhabdomyolysis is it's when your muscles break down and release a protein called myoglobin into your bloodstream, and that can be damaging on your kidneys. Anyways, kind of cool. You learn about heat. You learn about all these scientific terms before. So heat rash. Okay. So I think a lot of people experience heat rash when you start to, it's particularly in areas in your body where there's more sweat buildup. Heat syncope, lightheadedness, dizziness. If you've ever been on a hot day and you start feeling a little bit lightheaded, a little bit dizzy, heat cramps. Ever had a Charlie horse before? You ever woken up in the middle of the night? This really, I can't do this. Lots of times it's because you're dehydrated. So heat cramps, watch out for those. Watch out for those Charlie horses. They're no fun. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to keep going down. There we go. I'm going to figure this out. Then you have heat exhaustion. All right. Which is, you know, if you're, a lot of these are kind of intermixed, to be quite honest. They're kind of, you know, it's not like you just have heat exhaustion, you know, I mean, you might have a few of these put together, but heat exhaustion is more advanced. You start to feel very tired, very dreary. You start to feel dehydrated. You just aren't, you know, so lots of times your thirst actually lags dehydration. But when you're dehydrated and you can feel it and you know something's up, you might be experiencing some heat exhaustion. And then heat stroke. Heat stroke's the bad guy. You don't want heat stroke. That's when you start to become delirious and you start to pass out and you start to, you know, really heat up. That requires emergency medical attention. All right. So really quick rhabdomyolysis. Think muscle pain, darker urine, weakness of the muscles. Going down here. Heat rash, clusters of red bumps on the skin, particularly in areas that don't, you know, aren't as oxygenated or that they're more dinky on your body. Think of your pits. Often appears on the neck, upper chest, and in skin folds. Heat syncope. I think that's how you say it. Yeah, okay. All right. Great, guys. So fainting, dizziness, heat cramps, muscle spasms or pains, usually in the legs, arms, or trunks. And then, of course, this is heat exhaustion, which consists of these things: fatigue, irritability, thirst, nausea or vomiting. That's no fun. Dizziness, kind of a combination. They kind of start to add on top of each other. So if you're starting to have a lot of little things come together, you're like, this is not good. And then, of course, heat stroke. And I just say the really bad one. All right. So we want to really avoid that confusion, slurred speech, unconsciousness. So obviously, so when Tim Barber died, he died of heat stroke, right? He passed out, very high body temperature, 104 degrees or above, rapid heart rate. Yes. And so question, if somebody's going through heat stroke, you come across somebody who's going through heat stroke, do you go get water really quick and like give it to them? Like what's the best way to deal with heat stroke? Yeah, get them out of the sun. Yes. First things first, get them out of the sun, right? And then put them in a cool environment. You know, kind of mist their body with, if you can mist their body with some sort, if you have a spray bottle and you can kind of spray their body with you know, with cool water to kind of cool them down, because when they're really, oh, go ahead.
Clothing. How about like loosening up their clothing?
Yes, yeah, kind of, yeah. Get them and get their body feeling more cool, right? You don't want to give them a drink of water because they're delirious and they may not be like. You cool them down and you call 911 and you get them to an emergency medical facility as fast as you possibly can. So the average recovery time, according to my research, is about 1 to 2 days from heat stroke. But it requires emergency medical attention if somebody's actually going through heat stroke. Okay, heat safety awareness. So this begs the question: how do we avoid all this? How do we make it? You know, we don't want to, you know, have heat stroke. How do we? There's several. I mean, obviously, heat safety awareness is something that affects all of us, and so there's you know, more individual things you can do, and then of course there's more community things, you know, national things that have to take place. So it's very much a team effort. So really quick, so according to Donald Garby, the resin expert I am, whose knowledge I am borrowing for this presentation, there are 3 sources we need to consider for anticipating heat conditions. Okay, so there's environmental heat sources. So think heat that comes from an environmental source like the sun, like just anything that's exterior to you that generates heat. Metabolic heat resources, think internal. So if I go on a run, right, my body's going to heat up inside, right? And I'm going to sweat so my body can try and release heat. And then heat loss ability or lack thereof. Think of the clothes you're wearing and, you know, are they breathable, that kind of a thing. So there's really 3 factors we have to consider when doing heat safety awareness. So environmental heat sources, we talked about this, outdoor air temperature, hot equipment, or anything external that generates heat of some sort. All right. So obviously when Tim Barber was out, you know, doing construction, you know, he was under the blazing sun. So that was his environmental heat source that gave him heat stroke. Metabolic heat sources. So think internal heat generated by physical exertion. So remember we talked about the, laundromats and kitchens, how those are responsible for, for heat illnesses. Well, if people are moving around pretty quick, that kind of thing, you're generating a lot of heat inside of you. And that has to be considered when looking at heat illnesses. And then, of course, heat loss ability or lack thereof. Think of sweating efficiency and protective clothing. So what's a good fabric, guys, for working out in the sun? Do you want to wear polyester or cotton? What would you think? If you had to take a wild guess. Poly. So cotton. So cotton's lighter and it's more breathable. So cotton is better in the for heat. Linen, and then I've never heard of this before. Maybe I should have rayon. You ever heard of rayon? Get rayon clothing? Okay, great. I guess I'm not living in the 21st century, so I don't. Rayon. Okay, gotcha. I've heard of cotton. I've heard of other things, wool, but I haven't heard of rayon. So, anyways, cotton's the best type of fabric to wear because it's more breathable, more light. So the federal government has taken notice of this. So actually, as of April 12, 2022, OSHA released that during the first year of the Biden administration, OSHA published an advance notice of proposed rulemaking to initiate the rulemaking process towards federal heat standard. So what that means in a nutshell is currently there isn't a federal standard by OSHA for heat. That we know of right now. There isn't like specific federal OSHA standard guidelines for this is how these are the standards for heat. But they're in process of doing it right now. However, and correct me if I'm wrong, this was as of 2022, according to the article, so there isn't. But they still have a way to prosecute against employers that do this through what's called the general duty clause. And basically, the general duty clause requires employers to provide a place of employment that is free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm to employees. So OSHA still has a tool that it can use to prosecute employers who are abusing their workers, through heat, related illnesses. But as far as like specific heat related guidelines, as of right now, according to my research, there is no federal guideline. All right. Now, some states, as we know, some states have their own OSHA, their own OSHA government offices. So Washington, Minnesota, and California have specific laws governing heat exposure. All right. So it's kind of a piecemeal thing right now. So but yeah, that's something, it's kind of alarming. I mean, OSHA, it's been around since 1970, right? And so you would think that heat safety is a big enough issue that you would think there'd be some sort of standard on it. But of course, we don't know all the inner workings. Maybe some of you have worked at OSHA, I'm not sure, or someone who's listening on the camera. But yeah, so there's definitely a way to get involved. Apparently, it's still in process. All right, heat index. Let's look a little bit at the heat index. Thank you, Mike. Okay, so the heat index. So if we go to, there we go. All right, so this is kind of it's a heat index. It's a way of, we look at two factors. We look at humidity and then we look at temperature. So if the humidity increases, is that good or bad in terms of heat safety? That's bad, right? Because there's a lot of water vapor in the air. And so it's harder for evaporation on your body to take place, right? So it's like your body still keeps the heat inside more, right? And of course, increased temperature. So obviously the worst conditions when you have high humidity and high heat, right? And then, so obviously yellow is where we want to stay. Red is the no-go zone, extreme danger. Something to consider is, now, of course, I'm not just going to show up on, if I'm an ocean inspector, I'm not just going to show up on the site and just say, all you have to do is worry about the heat and the humidity, and you're fine. You know, if it's 80 degrees right now and humidity right now is at 81%, don't worry, you're in the yellow. You're like, well, so obviously if somebody's wearing clothing that doesn't breathe too well, you have to take that into account. This only takes into account two factors, right? So so this is part of the equation, but we still have to consider the other factors that we talked about as well. But yeah, so anyways, but this is a, you know, a good, just a general guideline to use when looking at general heat conditions. Oh, okay, let's all right, so other things we can do is okay. Acclimatization. Is that acclimatization? Okay, gotcha. Acclimatization. All right, so yeah, acclimatization. Thank you, sir. So Hal OSHA did a 2007 study, and so they examined 25 heat-related illnesses. Nearly 50% of cases where somebody suffered some sort of a heat-related illness happened on the first day of the job. So if Tim Barber, his happened on the second, well, it might have happened somewhat on the first day of the job, but then he had heat stroke on the second day of the job, right? And so it's like, but 80% of cases happen in 4 or fewer days. Okay, so lots of times what happens is people hire, you know, and you know, with construction projects, that kind of thing, they're very deadline sensitive, right? And so they have to get the job done. And so lots of times, you know, they'll hire and they'll just kind of throw them right out into the, you know, into the field. And yeah, it's really dangerous. So acclimatization is key. Okay, so interestingly enough, most people can acclimate to higher temps in 7 to 10 days. This is according to Donald Garvey, his expert knowledge that I am borrowing from. Okay, so 7 to 10 days. So NIOSH recommends that employees limit worker exposure to 20% of the usual duration of work in hot environment for the first day and increase 20% per day over the next 4 days. So just slowly, you know, you have them working in the heat, then you take them inside, and I don't know if they can do more clerical work, you know, in the cool environment, that type of a thing. So anyway, so acclimatization, I'm taking that to the bank. All right, so all right, remember to sip. Okay, so remember that thirst lags the need for water. Okay, so typically if you're really thirsty, you're probably already, you know, you've been a little dehydrated for a little while now. For limited exposure to heat, 1 cup of water every 20 minutes. So if you're, you know, for several sips over, well, let's talk about that just for a minute. For limited exposure to heat, 1 cup of water every 20 minutes. That's limited exposure. Heavy exposure, you're probably going to want to do a little bit of that. All right. Several sips over time beats occasional large gulps. All right. So the body is very efficient. So if you just pour, you know, water into the body, it's going to use what it needs, and then it's going to, you know, discharge anything that it doesn't need, right? But if you do small sips at a time, the body has a better way of absorbing that over a period of time. Okay, remember to sip. For prolonged exposure, NIOSH suggests a sports drink with an electrolyte carbohydrate concentration less than 8% by volume. So if you're really going to be out in the sun a lot, some sort of a sports drink might be in order. But if you don't have a sports drink, just drink more water. Maybe instead of 1 cup every 20 minutes, maybe you can do 1.5 or something like that. I remember when I was younger, my dad, we had a big project, and my dad would come and get all these mounds of dirt, you know, and they dump it in the street. We had these huge mounds of dirt because we were doing a lot of, you know, gardening work and landscaping work. And he said, now remember, drink, you know, such and such and such every minute because you got to drink. And so I always remember my dad telling me to drink. So, but yeah, so anyways, remember to sip. Other helpful tips. Implement worked rest schedules. So that's really important. If you've been out in the sun for about 3 or 4 hours, it might be okay to go into the shade for about 10 or 15 or 20 minutes. A buddy system. So making sure that we're keeping track of one another, right? You know, if you're working and your coworker is moving a little bit slower, a little bit more quiet, looks really red, it's like, hey, what's going on? You know, can I get you a drink? Provide cooling stations, and then of course urine tests. So if urine tests, obviously the darker the urine, the more likely you are to be in a dehydrated state. Stay cool, no pun intended, stay safe. And that is my presentation.
Thank you so much. We're actually just going to have you sit up here, if that's okay.
Sure.
As we're going to go into our Q&A section. So for those of you in person, if you have any questions, I'll start calling out people, as well as those of you online. If you have any questions, please feel free to put it inside the chat and we'll read them off as we go. Okay, we'll do this for a couple minutes. Brandy.
So, of the states that you said had heat-related, regulations, like what would those be for an employer? Like, I know we were talking earlier, you said you came across stuff in your work, like, can you maybe tell us what those are required?
So yeah, so I specifically work in pest control. And so we go out, I do audits on our technicians in the field. And in Arizona, Nevada, Florida, Massachusetts, and Idaho, employers are required to carry, employees are required to carry at least 1 gallon of drinkable water with them at all times in the vehicle. So I think what they've done is they specify a certain amount of water that has to be on hand. Obviously, that's not going to be, 1 gallon throughout the day probably won't be enough, if it's a really hot day and you have about 15 stops. So they just, as far as in pest control, they specify the actual quantity of water needs to be on hand. That's what I know about it thus far.
I actually have a question for you.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned a little bit about, OSHA, how it doesn't really have a federal standard for heat necessarily quite yet, but they still go after folks for heat-related deaths or injuries. What, in your opinion, could be done now to help basically keep people more accountable toward this? If there isn't that regulation, is it something that you can go to your employer and say, hey, this wouldn't fly by OSHA? What would you recommend in that case if you happen to notice some non-safe work environments?
It's like most things really started at the grassroots, right? So for me, I'm an auditor, I'm a health and safety auditor for my pest control company. And so the other day, I approached my boss and I said, why don't we make this a requirement for all of the states that we're in? Because we're in about 32 different states. I don't audit all those states. I audit several of them. And we had a discussion about it. He said, you know what? You ought to talk to our health and safety person and see what they think. And ultimately, he turned it down. So maybe I shouldn't say turned it down. It didn't quite take the hold that it needed to. I think that. So do I just stop and give up? No, you keep bringing awareness to it. You gently press it. So it's an individual thing where people have to take initiatives to talk to their bosses about implementing company standards, because it may not be an OSHA standard, but it could be a company standard. So sometimes you just have you have to kind of take those little victories, and yeah, but yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, kind of just like a quick follow-up with that.
Yeah.
Is there a way that you can think of to help increase accountability for these companies that might not be doing, other than, because like you said,
Yeah.
They didn't take to, those ideas quite yet.
Yeah.
Does that mean that there should be more accountability, since, just letting I come from a public health background.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
this is right up my wheelhouse. And so that's why I'm really interested in this. Is there something that you can say to an employer, say, hey, these are preventable, why aren't we doing this? Like, is there somewhere that you can go to if they still say no? Some type of recourse is what I'm kind of trying to get at.
That's a great question. Obviously, it depends from company to company. As far as recourse goes. The recourse that I would have would be to present to human resources. Who's over, who's over that type of thing. Who's over, partly over employee well-being, right? It's a complicated issue, it really is. You have to bring it up. You have to consider multiple factors. I brought it up because I thought it would be a good thing to do. I do remember now that my mind's starting to get jogged a little bit. I'm starting to remember a little more. I do remember my boss saying, but you can still check with them and see if they have it and recommend that they do it. It may not be company policy right now, but you can still check with them. I know I'm not giving you a clear
That's okay.
answer.
No, I appreciate it.
It's kind of like, am I going to call OSHA? And report my employer because of, we may not be requiring our technicians to have, water in their vehicles right at the moment. I don't know. I don't know if that'd be the right recourse. I felt like I started though, right? It's kind of like you start with what you can. Sometimes as far as businesses go, I'm kind of going off on one here, but sometimes as far as businesses go, you have to present a business case that makes sense to people too. Right? Because if I'm coming from health and safety, but I'm talking to somebody in operations, they're going to be like, well, how does this benefit us? How is this actually going to help operations? So you have to present a business case to people so it can actually make sense. So they want to do it. And so sometimes it's a matter of speaking their language as well. It's a multifaceted answer, but I'm sorry I couldn't give you a direct
That's okay.
answer.
No, I appreciate it. Appreciate the insight.
Curious, Mark, in your research, is there a specific demographic or who's more susceptible to stroke or illness? I ask because as a young man, I could run around with the old baby flying now, but I'm older. It's harder.
Yeah. Well, so obviously, the more infirm or the elderly, who don't have, whose body constitutions aren't. Oh man, I'm sorry. Oh my gosh. They're never gonna invite me back again. So So those who are more elderly or infirm or less able to help themselves are the first and foremost demographic of people that are susceptible. But as we saw from the movie of Tim Barber, he was a healthy 35-year-old male, prime of his life, and he died of heat stroke. So I didn't come across any, besides the more apparent answers, I didn't come across anything that said, this demographic's more likely to have a heat stroke incident. But anybody's really susceptible to it.
I would think too, there's a lot of warning signs before you get to heat stroke. So, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
The more you're aware, the more you're able to, stop it in the process, right? So it doesn't advance.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. It really is something. And you're right, though. It comes in stages. It's not like somebody just has heat stroke. You need it. You feel it coming on, right? So it's very preventable and detectable, right? Anyways, but yeah.
Are there any long-term effects, health concerns after suffering from mild case of heat stroke?
So my understanding is that heat stroke can cause organ damage if it's left, if it's not treated correctly, or even after. If you've had a severe case of heat stroke, you can have different types of organ damage. So yes, there are long-term effects. My knowledge stops there as far as like, I'm not in the medical field, but yes, the answer to that is yes, if you're not careful.
Looks like that's about it. Looks like there's no questions in the chat. If there are, feel free to message us. We'll try and get them answered if you do have any questions in the chat. But thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming here, Mark. I really appreciate it. Okay, great. Just as an upcoming reminder, our next Start with Safety will have Bob Corsi, who will do a drugs on the job presentation. That'll be really great. That'll be July 6th at 2023 at 10 a.m. You can check our website for more details. We'll probably be streaming it again. We'll do the exact same thing like we did today, but we'd love to see you there. But with that, if there is nothing else that needs to be said, I hope you all have a fantastic day and stay safe.
Really good question.
Yeah, he's.
Yeah, yeah, that made me think.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Sure. Like